Hey guys, Nick here, and today we are back with another remake video, and this is What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake, which is going to actually be a full story apart from the original video that I had on my channel. Speaking of which, that was near the start of my channel right after I made the first 5 parts to What If Rick Spared Shane, which was originally What If Rick Didn't Kill Shane. Now this What If Negan Killed Maggie video was only 4 minutes and a very short story, yet it has received a good amount of support and honestly done a lot better than I thought it would from the lack of detail and stuff, like my What If Rick Didn't Kill Shane original videos. But at any rate, Braden Douglas, about a month ago, possibly 2 months, depending on when this video drops, asked me if I could remake this. Yeah, like I said, it was about 2 months ago, and asked me if I could redo it because it would change a lot, especially in Season 11, which I actually agree with now that I actually go back and watch that original video and watch The Walking Dead over and over again. And since I already made What If Rick Spared Shane the remake, which has received a good amount of love in of itself, I decided, you know what? Why not? Because, like I said, my What If Rick Spared Shane remake has gotten a good amount of love, so why not take a look at this and make it a full story? So, here we are. Let's set the scene. So, we open up with the lineup at the end of Season 6, and honestly, the build-up to it being pretty much the same. It always is whenever I start the story, at least. But at any rate, we get into the introduction of Negan, and him saying that he's going to kill someone for killing his men. Takes his time picking who's going to be the one to have the honor of getting killed with Lucille, and the first victim, like before, is Abraham per normal, which goes the same way as you would expect, with the end result being Daryl punching Negan very stupidly, and Negan saying that he is now going to, or at least implying, that he is going to kill someone else. Now, the original one was Glenn, who he was standing right by him, and literally that was dead giveaway that he was going to kill Glenn. But the victim now is Maggie. And this actually gets us a cool scene. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but on YouTube there is a deleted scene with Negan killing Maggie specifically, and Glenn saying for Negan to take him, and then he gets knocked down by Dwight. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, I recommend you check it out on YouTube. The quality of it ain't really that good, but it's worth your time. Anyway, that gets us to that little cool deleted scene, but unfortunately, there's nothing Glenn can do here. And him doing this is honestly just as stupid as him trying to go at Negan the first time Negan threatened to kill Maggie. Only this time, it's real. Negan takes his sweet time bashing the crap out of Maggie's head until it's just nothing. There's nothing there. And this death upsets, breaks, angers, and completely shatters everybody. And I'm talking everybody in the group. More so than just Glenn and Abraham's deaths. Why? Because Maggie was, in their own words, the future because of her baby Herschel. And she was the sole purpose for going to Hilltop in the first place. Were it not for her, none of this would have ever happened. Not to say that she is any way to blame for this, because, like I said, the baby was the future. So it's not her fault. And it's just the way she grew and came into the group for the past 4 seasons that led to this point, she became a very helpful member of the group. And for her to be taken out callously like this, with no rhyme or reason, was just wrong. And this breaks everyone much more than Glenn's original death. And there is no other person that is broken, angered, and upset by this than Glenn, for obvious reasons. That was his wife that just bit the dust. And to add insult to injury, Daryl's not completely to blame for this, because he tried to save her on 2 separate occasions, and he doesn't know if he got her killed, Negan got her killed, and it's a whole deal. And not only did he lose his wife, but his unborn child. And this is just all too much to take in. But with all that sadness in him, that immeasurable sadness, the feeling that he, Daryl, and just everything that's led up to this that caused Maggie's death pales in comparison to the one feeling that takes Glenn over. Rage. Hot, fiery, unbridled anger and rage. Like Glenn has never, ever felt before. Merle's torture of him? Paltry. What the governor did to Maggie? Paltry. What happened before whenever Abraham tried to keep him from finding her whenever they were split up during the prison attack? Paltry. This rage is a completely different side of Glenn. And now he is only thinking of 4 direct words. Kill Negan, avenge Maggie. He rushes at Negan. He doesn't care what happens to him or anyone else at this point. There is just fire in his eyes. And Negan, he expected this wholeheartedly, especially from not only the first reaction that he got out of Glenn after threatening to kill Maggie the first time, but the second time it was made dead clear that that was his wife, and that now, 3rd time's the charm, Negan just decides, well, this guy clearly hasn't learned his lesson, so I'm just going to make a true example of these people and kill him too. 3rd time's the charm after all, at least for them. He swings his bat, expecting Glenn to just fall over, or at least fall over and then die, but he dodges. Right whenever Glenn's running at him, he dodges the attack and kicks Negan so hard that he falls not only to the ground, but he actually is flown through the air for a split second and crashes to the ground. And Negan, he wasn't expecting this. Not only did this guy just dodge his attack whenever he was covered in pure rage, but he flew right under Negan's legs and then kicked him straight to the ground so hard and so high that it's almost inhuman. And Lucille falls to the ground right whenever Negan does. And this is definitely a change, not only for Glenn, but just a change in the mood that's affecting everyone right now. It's a lot to take in. Glenn grabs the bat and says that Negan is his and his alone. And if any saviors value their lives, they'll stay out of this, or he breaks the bat and kills Negan. Simon, being the uncaring and stupid person that he is, doesn't really care and is about to order some of the saviors to either kill one or more than one of this guy's friends, or just kill him in general. But Negan yells at Simon and all the saviors to stand down, to not fire a shot, to not attack anybody, to not do anything until he gets that bat back. That is Negan's only concern at this point, and he is very angry to see that someone did this to him, especially after he just fell to the ground and let this guy attack him, and stares Glenn straight in the eyes and tells him in a very serious tone that no one's seen him in yet to give him his bat back, and he will consider letting him at least live. But Glenn You really think he's going to take that deal? Oh no. He tells Negan straight out that there is nothing that he's going to say that is going to make him stop what he's about to do to him. And, with his very own lighter, does what Rick did with Glenn's lighter in the original Season 8, and lights Lucille ablaze, and begins his own version of what Negan did to Abraham and Maggie, except to Negan's entire body, which I will touch base on more here in a minute. Negan, seeing this, brings him to the same kind of PTSD version of Negan in Season 8, whenever Rick lit Lucille ablaze with what happened to his wife, whenever he burned the house down with her in it, and she had already killed herself, and yeah, you guys get the deal. But anyways, while Negan is dealing with this situation, Rick sees this as the perfect opportunity to strike. The Saviors aren't doing anything because they're not allowed, and Negan has his own deal with Glenn. Rick yells for everyone to attack. And with that said, even though they're outnumbered, the Saviors were ordered directly by Negan not to attack. And they're not going to disobey, at least everyone but Simon. So that means that Simon, Dwight, and all the other Saviors in this area are killed. Negan, seeing this, and seeing that his bat is taken from him and lit aflame, is very perplexed at what to do right now, because he definitely was not expecting this twist in his arrangements of what he had planned for Rick's group, to give him stuff and, his whole deal in the original. But Negan, every time he tries to make a grab for it or fight his way to get his bat back, it is met with a either whack to his head, whack to his side. It's just met with complete resistance. And eventually, Negan gets so tired of it that he asks Glenn, is he just going to kill him at this point? Because he's about to be just done with this guy. Glenn smirks at him. And this is no ordinary smirk. This is a angry, overconfident, and completely unrecognizable Glenn smirk. And tells him no. And then goes to a straight and serious, stern, and completely unrecognizable look and tells him that he is not going to kill him yet, because that wouldn't do him justice. No. Instead, he's going to break every bone in Negan's body, make him bleed until all he sees is utter complete red, and then only when the pain is too much for Negan to bear, only then will Glenn kill him. And he says this all to Negan's face. And Rick, seeing this, because the Saviors are dead, he's thinking whether he should help Glenn or not, but Glenn seems to be doing all right on his own, despite not being in the right state of mind. But ultimately, Rick doesn't blame him, because as I said before, Maggie was very, very important as a character. And he just lets him go. Lets Glenn deal with Negan on his own. And eventually, the bat that Lucille once was is unrecognizable because of how much Glenn is just going hog wild at Negan, breaking bone after bone, scraping, bashing, anything and everything he can do to make sure that Negan feels not just pain, not just sorrow, not just sadness, but just breaks him in every way, shape, and form. And Negan, he is almost completely out of it. He has tried attempt after attempt, swing after swing, to get his bat back, to talk Glenn down, but it's not working. And eventually, Negan has grown to the point he just gives up. And he decides that he better just tell Glenn what's what. He better just plead or do something to get Glenn to stop. He's not even worried about getting the bat back at this point. And Negan just begins to tear up and ask Glenn for mercy. And this was very, very unexpected. Glenn stares at Negan emotionless. Not because he didn't register what Negan said, not because he's refusing to listen, but because he is dumbfounded at this guy who just asked him for mercy. But then he speaks up and he tells Negan, where was the mercy for Abraham? Where was the mercy for all the people he enslaved and killed before? And worst of all, and most importantly of all, where was the mercy for his wife? Who, by the way, was pregnant. And he informs Negan of this and says that he didn't just kill his wife. He didn't just threaten to and then do it. He cost the life of both his wife and his unborn child. Now, Negan knows why Glenn was so defending of this. It wasn't just his wife. It was his baby, who wasn't even born yet. And with that said, Glenn tells Negan straight out, he is not going to give him any kind of mercy. Negan didn't give mercy to anyone who asked for it. So he's not going to give any mercy to him. And only when he's satisfied of breaking anything and everything of Negan's will he kill him. And he will finally be done with what he's doing. And then Negan decides, you know what? Better just tell and just come clean now. And he says, I had a wife too. And this doesn't just stun Glenn and confuse him and break him out of his rage, but this stuns everybody, because they weren't expecting Negan to say this. Even though he is on death's door at this point, or pretty close to, they still weren't expecting this change of character. For Glenn to break Negan like this so callously. Negan decides that if he doesn't say or do something now, he will die. And decides to admit that, yes, he is wrong. He has enslaved people. He has killed people who didn't ask for it. And that he, once again, repeats, he had a wife too. And he wasn't always like this. He explains his backstory. And this isn't like my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, where this is mentioned a season early. This would be 3 seasons early. And he mentions his backstory on his wife Lucille and how he named the bat after her. Because she had cancer, he went to go get the supplies, ran into the biker gang, the whole deal with his wife's backstory and his. And coming home to realize that his wife had killed herself, and this ultimately turned Negan into the person that he is today. And the bat that he got from the first savior of his, Laura, that was given to him, that's why it was wrapped in barbed wire and everything, to show his strength and to remind him of his wife, and that he doesn't expect an apology to work on Glenn. No siree, not after what just literally happened. But he knows very well what the loss of someone can do to someone. Glenn is pure proof of what Negan's become, and that there's a better way for him to react to this, and what Negan's been taught by Glenn, he just wants to live. And if Glenn can do that, he won't go down the path that Negan did. And Glenn, having to register this, sits down for a second to process this. But will this very backstory work to sway Glenn into not killing Negan? Or will he become worse than Negan? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing if Negan's backstory to Glenn will change Glenn into stopping him from becoming like Negan was, or if Glenn at this point is just not in the caring type to care about this at all and will kill Negan regardless. This is part 2 to What If Negan Killed Maggie the remake. Now, Glenn after hearing Negan's backstory, is genuinely surprised now and half broken out of his rage, because he wasn't expecting this villain who callously took his wife to have this kind of story. And as much as he doesn't want to care, his feelings and mutual respect for other people is coming back to him. Like the pizza guy, Glenn part of him from season 1, that's coming back. And the rage that he was feeling is generally starting to simmer down. But here's the thing. How much Glenn was around Maggie, how much he cared for her, how much he loved her, and the fact that his baby was taken from him, it's too much to bear. And he just cannot get that out of his head. So as much as he wants to accept this story, it's really, really hard. And the sadness and anger that he's feeling, it's almost like those feelings are coinciding with each other. And it's hard to pick one, to be completely and utterly heartbroken or mad or both. It's just too much. And eventually, only one feeling washes over Glenn's mind. Sadness. Completely heartbroken sadness. And eventually, Glenn drops Lucille, drops everything he has. Well, Lucille would be the only thing he has, and just breaks down sobbing. And this would be a really, really sad moment for fans if they were watching this, for Rick's people, and it's just a lot to take in. And Rick, and everybody else, since the Saviors are dead, are just all watching this go down, and Rick feels that it's his time to step up and do something or say something. And he walks up to Glenn and Negan, picks up the bat, walks up to Negan, gets a pair of handcuffs, cuffs Negan, and says that now that the battle has been won, at least here, they're all going to go back to Alexandria now, formulate a plan, but Negan, he's being locked up, and he's coming back. Now, wait a minute. What? There's probably a lot of you that are thinking, what? After all that, Negan's still getting spared? Really? And there might have been a hint of that, sure, because, you know, with what ifs, you gotta leave kind of a hint, but what? After all this, really? Now all the anger that everyone was feeling towards Negan is now attracted onto Rick in this very moment. And this is bringing a season 8 finale little kind of twist in. So this is a season and a half early. And Rick's people, everyone there, tells him to think about Abraham. Think about Maggie. Think about how much they meant to Rosita, Sasha, Glenn, especially Glenn. And it's like, he doesn't even care right now. And after all that, after Glenn breaking down especially, and after one pathetic sob story later, Rick just walks up, grabs the bat, doesn't even attempt to bash Negan's head in, and is now treating him like he did nothing wrong. He's just gonna lock him up. And it's like, oh well, just lock him up and everything will be okay. And pretend there's nothing wrong. La-di-da-di-da-di-da. Like, it's all wonderful. And it's like, huh? And there's probably a lot of you in the comments thinking the same thing. But thankfully for you guys, and thankfully, well, kind of, for Rick's people, Rick default dances on that whole argument, saying that he's not letting Negan off easy just because he's sparing him. Negan is very well going to pay for the crimes that he's committed, not just to Maggie and Abraham, but to everyone that he has enslaved or killed. He's going to be locked up for a long time, and he means that. Because Rick was a man of his word. Now, he's not going to lock him up forever, but he is going to lock him up for a long time to make him truly understand how much their people, Maggie and Abraham, meant to them, especially Glenn. And he looks at Glenn when he says this to mean his sincerity. And Rick points his python straight at Negan, saying if Negan has any objections to this, or if he thinks that Rick is wrong for doing this, he's going to just shoot him right here and now. Honestly, doesn't care what Negan thinks. He just wants to hear if Negan has any objections to this, because this is saving Negan. And Negan says himself that as much as he thinks he deserves to die for what he did to Maggie and Abraham, seeing especially how much these two people meant to them, he does want to be given another chance. And seeing how Glenn has basically almost turned into another version of him, he wants to do everything he can to prove that he's worthy of redeeming himself, basically. And Rick smiles at this and is glad that Negan is being compliant and understands the severity of what he did. And with that said, you guys are probably thinking, really? Really? Is that how we're going to end the story here? Is this just going to be Season 8 finale rehashed just with extra survivors? Because this is so late in the Walking Dead universe, you're making this what if, which I've done before. But that's it? Wrong! Because I said that this was going to be a full story. And if I ended it here, then that wouldn't make for a good story. So this story has just begun, my dear folks. And this is just the start of what's to come, especially with Negan being spared in front of Glenn, because that's going to have severe ramifications going forward. Now, as I said before, Negan is not getting locked up forever like Rick and Michonne were planning on it, even though he eventually got out. But he is getting locked up for a long time. Now, while this is going on, and after they put Negan in the cell, everyone who's able goes to Hilltop, the only known community at the time, because Carol and Morgan are still at the Kingdom, to spread the word and say that Negan and the Saviors have been dealt with for now. Gregory is not one to believe this, and because the sanctuary is still around, and Jesus would likely be the only one to know of this, but Gregory, not knowing, doesn't believe it, and even asks where Maggie is, because she's the one who made the deal about the half of stuff thing, and he's just genuinely curious as to where she is if the threat was taken care of. And he's honestly making a complete jerk of himself, to say the least. And, you know, it's just Gregory being Gregory. And Glenn being there and seeing full force what Gregory is like, because he was kidnapped, if you guys remember, by Dwight, is just not at all have any kind of patience for this guy. And the rage with Negan being spared catches up to Glenn, grabs a knife, and slits Gregory's throat right there and then, killing Gregory not only 2 seasons early, but definitely causing a lot of shock amongst everyone in the group, especially the Hilltop community, because nobody was expecting this. But when they really think about it, and if you guys really think about it, this is pretty much justified. This is what Glenn would do if Gregory started even the slightest notion of being a jerk, especially if Maggie was killed and Glenn was spared. And the group has to agree that Gregory kind of deserved this. And Glenn, what's going to happen with him? Will he really be able to be all right with Negan being spared? Or is the rage in him going to well up so much that it outcasts him from the rest of the group in just an effort to kill Negan? And will this get him killed in the process? Hey guys, it is Nick here, and today we will be seeing if Glenn will actually give in to the rage inside of him to avenge Maggie, or if his feelings are so mixed up at this point that Negan's fate will remain undecided. This is part 3 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, to discuss the rest of what happens after the whole argy-bargy with Negan before we get into the big stuff, Carl and Enid, like all my other stories, get into a relationship, and that actually develops a lot more than their original. And Rick goes down to see Negan and talk to him about what's going on, except this is a season early. Actually, it would be 2 seasons early, because this would be near the beginning of season 7 territory, since the battle with Negan at the clearing just happened, pretty much. So, yeah. Anyways, he also interrogates Negan to see what other communities he has under his control. Hilltop, obviously, but since Gregory is now dead thanks to Glenn, and Jesus is now the new leader, Hilltop is honestly not a problem to worry about anymore. Just few things here and there with Jesus having to be the new leader and such. Nothing too major. Now, Negan also mentions the kingdom, where King Ezekiel is the leader there, and Gavin, one of his top lieutenants, goes there to collect deliveries. Then he mentions the junkyard, and the leader's name being Jadis, and those people not really being the most trustworthy or talkable groups out there, meaning that they're just not a group you want to be around without some higher means of authority, like Negan. Because how else would Jadis and her people have conspired with Negan if they didn't have more authority than them? Anyways, Negan says that with him being here, and his top lieutenants Simon and Dwight being dead, all the other leaders will eventually rally the saviors that are at the sanctuary and outposts against Rick's group. But there is a way to fix that. He just wants his bat back, and then he will go to the sanctuary to tell all of his men to stay down forever, and that Rick's group and all the other kingdoms are going to work together from now on. Because if he does that, then there won't be any problems. But if he does not go back soon, that's going to start a war that Rick and his people might not be able to win, even without Negan. And even if they do win, it's going to cause damage that it's going to take a long time to fix. Damage that would have happened had Negan stayed in charge, possibly even worse, which would have been the original. Now, Rick thinks about this and says that this does sound like a pretty good deal, but here's the thing. Rick tells Negan that if he tries one thing, just the one little thing, to try and backstab him or his people, he's just going to kill him and all of his people right there on the spot. No mercy, no questions asked, because remember, he did kill Maggie and Abraham. So it really wouldn't be too far of a punishment for him. But the deal is decided. That's how it's going to be. But the anger felt towards Rick for what he did to spare Negan is much stronger here, especially with certain other people being alive. And one person who just cannot let it go is Glenn, obviously, because of Maggie, how influential she was to the group, how much she meant to Glenn. And Glenn pulls Rick aside and talks to him about it before they actually go out and do their plan. Glenn begs Rick to reconsider and just end Negan's life. It's better for everyone. It's better for Maggie, better for Abraham. Maggie especially. Not that Abraham was just nothing, but Glenn lets it be known to the best of his ability how much Maggie meant to him. But Rick says that he's not just doing this for Maggie. He's not just doing this for Abraham. And he's not even just doing this for the group and all the other communities. He's doing this for Glenn and for everyone that they've lost previously. Because, think about it. Dale, he brings this up too. He would be one that even if Negan did all this, there would be a fine line of saving humanity. And if you don't think that Rick would do this here, think about it. He spared Negan because of Carl being alive. Well, not being alive, but him wanting a better future. And to be honest, if Negan were to have killed Maggie, I honestly feel that Dale would be brought up in some way, shape, or form to sway Glenn from going down the same path as Negan. And Negan saying this himself in front of Glenn, that would definitely spike Rick to not want to assist Glenn in killing Negan. Except it would be different circumstances rather than Carl wanting it as his last wish. But Glenn, he doesn't want to lose this argument. And even brings up Shane, which is really not a good idea. He brings up that if Shane were still alive, he would kill Negan right on the spot the second that his bat swung down on Abraham. He wouldn't even let Negan kill Maggie. Even if he was, cray-cray. Rick, hearing Shane being brought up, no. Glenn went too far. Rick was pretty much on his side until what Negan said about Glenn becoming just like him. And now this, Rick is definitely not in the mood to be on Glenn's side, with Shane being brought up. The two actually get into a fight, which we've really never seen before. We saw them argue in Season 3, true, but we never really saw Rick and Glenn get into a fist fight, or have that many interactions, honestly, which is kind of a shame. But this would actually be an all-out fist fight to the death. So this would be like a Rick and Shane moment. But Glenn ain't winning that, and Rick beats him down senseless. Now, Daryl and Michonne, who are coming along, by the way, are around to see this happen, and Daryl is half tempted to step in along with Michonne, because really hadn't seen Rick get this crazy with a fight since Pete and maybe Tyrese, whenever Tyrese was mad about Karen and David. But Rick calms himself down because he knows what Glenn is going through. And Negan is right in a way. If Glenn goes down this path, he will become just like he did, even worse. He's showing it. And that he's doing this to help him. And Negan made a deal, and if he breaks it, only then will he kill him and the rest of his saviors. But the deal's in place, there's no turning back now. Now, while all this is going on, Jesus takes it upon himself to go to the other communities that Negan had under his control, Kingdom being the first, to tell them about Negan and saviors not being a threat anymore. But first up, of course, like I said, is the Kingdom, where Carol and Morgan are still at, and by this time, I feel, would be just walking out of Ezekiel's little house thing, theater thingamajig. Morgan is conflicted on hearing that the saviors are no longer a threat, because, sure, this is kind of what he wanted, for the saviors to be dealt with in a way that didn't involve a war or anything like that, but hearing that Negan's spared after what he did to Maggie, a pregnant woman and everything else, and Abraham, it conflicts him, but he's definitely happy that Rick chose the former, of sparing Negan. Carol, hearing that Maggie is dead, especially, this definitely hurts her. Because, especially after what Paula and all the other saviors did whenever they kidnapped Carol and Maggie, and thinking that Maggie's baby was dead then, she definitely needs a long time to think about this, and goes off on her own like before. But eventually I feel that Ezekiel would warm up enough to get her to come back with him and everything to the kingdom, at least. Get her out of her comfort zone, because, you know, Ezekiel was trying to get Carol to like him at this point, see where he was coming from and everything, and he's definitely happy that he doesn't have to work for the saviors anymore. Now, next stop is Jadis's people, and although they're happy that they don't have to work under anyone anymore, at least with Negan and the saviors, Jadis, I feel, would still want to trade someone to get into the city, which I feel is what they did with Heath. Either that or they just killed him, but that's unrelated. But anyways, I feel that when Jesus does go there, that she would try and kidnap him, most likely, or apprehend him to trade him to get into the CRM. But Jesus, being the fighter that he is, I don't see him losing at all, even if he is outmanned. Because although we didn't see a lot of it, Jesus was a good fighter. He kept his own against Morgan. So it would be a pointless effort to go there anyway, because the scavengers would just get themselves killed. Now at the sanctuary, the only leader types left are Laura, Gavin, Regina, and Rot, with Simon and Dwight obviously being dead, and the rest of the saviors, including these leaders here, waiting on the return of Negan, Simon, Dwight, and all the other bunches of saviors that went out. But they would never return. Except for Negan, of course. And Sherry would never know what happened to Dwight because he's dead. And this has happened before with my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, and it's just some kind of sad, honestly, for Sherry, not knowing if her husband, boyfriend, I don't know what really was the deal there, but anyway, Negan and all the others, Rick, Daryl, Michonne, who are at the sanctuary now, begin their plan, and Negan asks for his bat back so he can go and talk to his men and sort everything out like they agreed. Now, Rick, having Lucille at this point, does not really... He doesn't know how to feel about this. He doesn't know if he should, one, take Glenn's side and just ice Negan here, or just go through with the plan. The easier way out. But they did make a deal, and this is for the greater good. So, ultimately, he gives Negan the bat, and Negan goes up to the walls of the sanctuary to tell his men to stand down and that everything will be peaceful and good again. But will Negan actually do this? Or is this just a secret plan to gather all of his men together with whatever forces they have left and take back what Negan thinks is his? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing if Negan will actually go through with making all the rest of the saviors stand down and work with Rick and his people, or if this is all just a secret plan for Negan to get back his role and turn on Rick. This is part 4 to the remake of What If Negan Killed Maggie. Now, Negan steps up to the entrance of the sanctuary, where all the saviors have come out to, awaiting Negan, Simon, Dwight, all the saviors that have took a very long time to return, and now Negan has appeared, alone. He tells all the saviors what happened at the clearing, and that one of the people that he killed was a pregnant woman, and that he has made mistakes, a lot of them, and he tells all the saviors that they're going to stand down, no more taking over communities, and they're going to work with Rick and their people, and peace is going to be the number one factor of the saviors from this point on. Now, there is a long moment of silence, with the saviors being completely blank as to what Negan just said, and then laughter. Complete, unbridled laughter. Every one of the saviors cracks up at this. Well, mostly all of them, and then the rest follows suit. Except maybe like Sherry and stuff like that. But anyways, they cannot believe what Negan's saying, because half the time you could never know whether Negan was serious or not, because Negan's sense of humor and everything, it was just, you never knew. But Negan shuts that down right away, and the nearest walker, either the one who would be in chains, or one that was barred up to the walls of the sanctuary, Negan slams his bat straight into the walker's head, and then flings the blood from it across a bunch of saviors. And they now know that from what Negan just demonstrated, he ain't fibbing. Everything that he just spoke was the truth. Now, of course, a bunch of the saviors thought this was true, but a lot of them laughing, you can't help but join in with the whole crowd of laughter. Anyways, Negan makes it truly clear that his role as the Savior's leader is changed, and that Rick is basically the new one in charge. He will still take authority for the most part of the Saviors, but as for, giving orders and making sure the peace is well, Rick is now the new one in charge of that. And Rick steps out and is very happy that Negan kept his word and did not try and rally the Saviors together to fight. It definitely made it a lot easier. And, with that said, the Saviors look to Rick as the new leader, but still look to Negan. Rick says that Negan will still be a leader to them for the most part, but as for taking over communities and stuff like that, they're all going to work together. So there's not one specific leader overall. It's kind of unanimous, honestly. And with that said, Negan still does have to go in the cell for some time. He has to pay still for what he did to Rick's people, Maggie and Abraham. And Negan's just about to give the bat back to Rick, but just then, right when he's handing it, a gunshot rings out from seemingly out of nowhere, and the shot goes straight through Negan's hand, and for the second time, Lucille falls to the ground. But who did this? Who it is surprises everybody, but no one more than Rick. The one who fired the gunshot and stopped this all from happening, stopped the peace, was Glenn. He just could not stop the rage and sadness over Maggie's death, leading him to do this. Even though Negan said that this rage would turn him into something more than what he was, Glenn didn't care. It was just too much for him, because if you guys know how close he was to Maggie, then you'll understand what I'm saying. Rick cannot believe what Glenn is doing. They're finally so close to peace, and Glenn's just about to botch it all up, just for revenge. Rick tells him to stand down and put the gun down, and what he's doing is a big mistake. But Glenn is so full of rage now. The sadness? Oh, he cried and bawled plenty. Now there is nothing left in Glenn's mind except rage. Complete, utter rage, anger, hate, fury, every word you can think of that basically means he is not going to listen. He doesn't care what Rick thinks or Negan thinks. He doesn't care what anyone thinks. He just wants Negan dead. And just then, he goes and turns to Rick and says that he's responsible for this also. Whenever Abraham died, Rick just sat and watched it happen. Didn't try to get up, didn't try to fight, didn't do anything. He just sat there and let it happen. And then, whenever Maggie gets killed, he just sits there and lets it happen again. And then, whenever Negan throws the sob story in about his wife and what made him a bad guy, telling Glenn not to be just like him, everything before didn't matter about their family, who they were with. It mattered only when Negan did that story. Did Rick want to step out of that derpy foothold that he was in and act like a leader? But then he just spares him. It's like a big joke. And Glenn is just like, no thank you at this point. And if Rick's not going to step up and be a leader, he will. Because it's like Rick doesn't even care that Maggie and Abraham died. And he just cannot get Maggie's death out of his head. This is Glenn. Imagine Maggie, her hatred for Negan still, with Glenn. That's like times 1,000. And that if he's not going to be a leader and kill Negan like Shane or someone else would or could have, then he will. Rick says that he's doing this for him. He owes his life to Glenn, for God's sake. And he wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for Glenn. And Daryl has admitted it in the original show, and it's true. He owes his life to Glenn. And he's doing this for him. And what Negan said about him becoming worse than Negan is true. And Glenn should know more than anyone, especially back at the prison, how Rick was when he lost Lori. Shane, he knows what loss is and what it turns people into. And Glenn being like this, it's not going to solve anything. And that he just needs to stop. He's doing this for the greater good. To not be just a soul killer and a monster. But Glenn says that's what Negan just demonstrated at the clearing. And that if it were Shane or Lori or Michonne or Carl that Negan killed, Rick would have killed him right on the spot, and he knows it. Basically, Maggie and Michonne talk, except Rick and Glenn here. And it's true. That is very, very true. And honestly, Glenn is just thinking that Rick's treating Maggie as if she were a pile of trash. Even Abraham. But Glenn is way more focused on Maggie. Maggie is the sole front here of Glenn's anger. And it's like she doesn't even matter to Rick. But Rick, hearing Shane being mentioned and the possibilities of Negan killing someone close to him, everything that Glenn was saying made sense to Rick. But now, Glenn's just taking it way too far. And Rick has had enough. He has had way more than enough. He thought that after beating Glenn down the first time, that would have made him stop. But now, shooting Negan and saying all this stuff, he's taken it way too far. And Rick and Glenn get into another fight, with the fight being way more even this time. Because we not only have one person that's full of fury and rage, we have two. And that's what makes the fight so even, is because they're both angry. They both have to get anger off their minds, except Glenn is way more angry here. Negan, seeing all of this happen and transpire, doesn't know what to think, who to save. But then he makes up his mind, gets himself out of his head, picks up his bat, even though his hand, shot through his hand, and takes his bat and slams it straight across Glenn's face, knocking him to the ground and knocking him unconscious, at least for the moment. But this does not kill him. I'm going to say that again. This is not killing him. And here's the thing with that also, for those of you questioning this. The reason that he hit Glenn and not Rick is because if he would have hit Rick, Glenn would have killed Negan, and it really wouldn't be anything to go off of after that. The story would be... I honestly don't know what I would do with the story after that. It would be pointless. But the reason he hit Glenn is because Rick has helped him see the light. And sure, Glenn did do that, but he's tried to kill him on more than one occasion, whereas Rick has given him a chance. And Glenn is still alive, like I said, because he wasn't slammed in the head like he was originally, so his eyeballs not popped out. But he was slammed across his face, and he was lucky that it didn't break his jaw, but it did seriously scar his face. Now, Rick, after this, is tempted on killing Negan here just for attacking Glenn, even though he's not dead. But you gotta think about this for a second. Negan did attack Glenn, that is true, but he didn't attack Rick afterwards. He attacked only Glenn because Glenn was fighting him. And if you think about it, Negan just saved Rick's life here. He could have killed them both right then and there while they were fighting, and possibly gotten himself killed. But he did the right thing by making Glenn stop. And Rick honestly has to thank him for that. And Negan's kept his word so far on not rallying against Rick and everything else. Rick then turns to Glenn, who is now awake again, but badly bruised. Basically what he looked like when he was tortured by Merle, and when he was hit by Negan. Honestly, I'd mix the two together, except he still has both eyes. Rick goes on to have a full-on speech towards Glenn here, and says that this is not what Glenn was like before. And he once again says that Maggie's death has turned him into something he's not. And that if he goes down a worse road than he did, or Negan did, or anyone did, it will get him killed, and it nearly just did. Rick does not want to be known all the time as a killer. The only reason that Rick has killed ever is because it was for the greater good. Shane, he asked for it. Every other guy that he has killed, they asked for it. He never had a choice. And the reason he's doing this now, sparing Negan, he's doing it in the memory of Dale, who would have spared him. Herschel would have at least found a way to spare him. Lori, who definitely would be close to not sparing him, but would want to. And in the memory of her and Carl, who is still around. To the living memory of Carl, who would want a future, even though he's not demonstrated that part of him yet. And towards Negan's dead wife Lucille, who made Negan what he is because of her death. And it's all jangled together to build a better future. And even though Rick has killed before, and that Glenn is most certainly right. If it were Shane, Daryl, Michonne, Carl, Lori, any one of them who got killed by Negan, he would have done something. And it's not that he doesn't care about Maggie and Abraham. He just does not want to be known all his life as a merciless killer. He does not want to become what Negan was, or what other people in his life that he was fighting or around became. Glenn finally understands where Rick is coming from. And it's all back to sadness now. And says that, okay. Now, while he says this, he says to Rick, he might be saying okay here, and he might be standing down, but he's never, ever, ever forgiving Negan for what he did. And that just because he's not going to kill him anymore, He's not going to ever forgive him. And that's okay. That's understandable. And the funny thing is, also, is that the whole time that this was happening, all of the saviors, and Daryl and Michonne and whatever other people from Rick's group would be there, watched the whole thing go down. And when Glenn shot and the whole fight happened, they were just seeing how it would play out, similar to how it did in the clearing, because they figured it would resolve itself, although all the saviors didn't really see that go down. But that's okay. And the fact that Glenn does not forgive Negan, that is okay, because Maggie and the baby were killed. It makes sense. But now, everything seems to have been solved. And now, peace has seemingly been restored. But has it? Because of Glenn acting in a much more callous way than Maggie ever has in her attempts to kill Negan, which we know about if you guys pay attention to The Walking Dead, what does this mean for Glenn doing it so soon with Maggie and Herschel's death? Does that mean that the rivalry will end much sooner? Or is this what Glenn has demonstrated, leading into a more twisted plot to get rid of Negan? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how far Glenn and Negan's rivalry will go, since it is beginning and progressing way more so than Negan and Maggie's rivalry. That's where we're gonna kinda find out today. Now, this is part 5 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, to touch up base upon after the last episode, Tara returns to Alexandria per the norm after Oceanside. And Eugene, it's actually a much better return for Tara, because even though Denise is dead, that's still a sad thing, but Glenn is still alive, and the saviors have been dealt with. So, while Denise's death is sad for Tara, Glenn and the whole savior thing being solved, that kinda warms it up better, I would say. So, after hearing that the saviors have been dealt with, albeit Negan and everyone still being alive, not really sitting well with Tara as well as a bunch of other people, she feels it's best to return to Oceanside to tell the Oceanside people the good news. And even though Cindy told her never to come back ever, after Tara says the war with the saviors is over and explains all what happened, albeit with Cindy and them not really taking this too seriously, Tara kinda seems like she's telling the truth, so they're happy they don't have to worry about Negan and stuff anymore. But I'll touch base on more with Oceanside here in a minute. Now, Negan is still in the cell, just not forever, because he still has to atone for what he did to Maggie and Abraham, as well as a bunch of other communities. So he's still not getting off the hook, but he's not going to be kept in there forever like his canon counterpart was supposed to be. Now, Glenn has to recover, sort of like what I did with Shane, except much less worse, because Glenn only got slammed in the face with the bat instead of getting hit in the head, so he didn't lose his eyeball, but he still did slammed across the face with Lucille. And even though it's lucky enough that he didn't break his jaw, it did badly scar and injure his face, so Glenn has to take the time to recover. And Olivia is still alive, so even though Denise is dead, I could see Tara and Olivia getting together here. Now then, time to, well, before we talk about Alpha and the Whisperers, there are a few other things we need to touch base upon before we get into that territory, because there's still a little bit of story here to get to. First off, there is one soul group that is missing here. Jadis and Scavengers are no more, thanks to the likes of Jesus. So, not the hugest deal, but they did serve a key part in season 7, 8, and kinda 9. Well, at least Jadis in 9. And the kingdom is still around, and in seemingly perfect condition. And as for the residents, Carol, even though she's very broken with the death of Maggie, because if you guys watched near the end of season 6, you'll understand why that is the case, because of the whole getting kidnapped by Paula and the Saviors thing. I feel that Ezekiel would eventually warm up or Carol would warm up to Ezekiel in the manner that she wouldn't be secluded anymore, because she already wanted to be on her own, but Maggie's death sort of pushed that further. But with Ezekiel, I feel that they would connect sooner or later. Morgan is also still residing in the kingdom, as I've done before, at least with my What If Rick Spared Shane remake. Not really too many other stories that I had with him doing that. But anyways, he teaches Henry and Benjamin the stick like he does in canon. And that develops quite nicely, because since the Saviors are now dealt with, that means that Benjamin is going to survive, along with Shiva, Richard, and several other kingdom members that got killed in season 8. So, a little bit of a dub there for Ezekiel and the king, or the kingdom. Now, for Hilltop, there really isn't anyone who has died there except the whole deal with Ethan, but that was before the story even became a thing, and Gregory, who got his throat slit by Glenn. But who gets to become the leader? Well, it's either a combination of Tara or Jesus, like it was in canon, because even though Glenn did kill Gregory, and he would be the next most likely to be a leader, because Maggie was, I feel that he would eventually become the leader, but he still has to recover, so if he does become the leader, it's not right now, because he still has to recover, and he's still not getting over the fact that Maggie's dead, and I don't think being a leader for Hilltop would really sit in well with Glenn's mind right now. He has a lot to think about, especially after even talking with the whole not wanting to kill Negan thing with Rick in the last episode. Now at Alexandria, Gabriel does not lose his sight, or, half of it, because he doesn't have that whole deal where he ran into Negan and they had to get out of the little shed there, or wherever they were. They didn't go together, and that whole thing didn't happen, so he still has part of his sight. And for Carl and Rick, they go out to save Sadiq, and it's both of them this time, which means that Carl does not get bit here, and he actually gets to survive. So, that's another good thing for Carl, because I've had him survive in a lot of my stories. Rosita and Spencer, like my last story, or my last remake story, get together. So, that actually progresses rather nicely too. Because none of my other stories, besides my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, and now this one, I've never really had them get together. So, it's nice. Eugene crafts bullets for all the communities, I feel would be the case, or mainly Alexandria, because since he did not join Negan here, I feel that his construction of the bullets would continue, except this time it would be for Alexandria and mainly and the other communities, because since this is so early on into not even season 8, I would feel, he would still do this. And Eric is still alive here, which would put Aaron in a much more better mental state, which I've also touched base upon before. Rick and Michonne still have their relationship and get it progressed, And that kind of was already the thing with Season 6, but into Season 7, it grew way more. And never really had a situation or a story where I talked about Rick and Michonne specifically, so it's nice. Now, Sasha is still alive here, but all alone. But that will change later on in the story. And I know with my original, I had that whole thing where I said Rosita and Sasha would be with Glenn. I now realize that maybe that was a little bit silly, but Sasha will get with someone. I'm just not going to say that right now. And you already know who Rosita gets with because I just explained it. Now, for Morales, because he eventually becomes known to different members of the group, and the name is mentioned. And with Rick, Carl, Daryl, Glenn, and Carol all being alive still, I feel that even though people like Daryl and maybe Glenn would not want him around, especially after all of what's happened, I feel like Glenn more than Daryl would warm up to the idea of welcoming Morales back, because Daryl might have not cared much about Morales in the moment where he killed him in canon, but Glenn, I feel, would be even different, even if he was still struggling over the whole Negan thing. So, that means that Morales, like other stories, at least for now, gets to survive. And remember how I said that there would be more story to cover before the whole Whisperer arc? This is about to touch base upon that here right now, because Natanya doesn't really like the idea that the Saviors are still around, even if the peace has been subsided, because she thinks that this could very well be a trick to bring them down again, and even worse, and that Rick and everybody else is being played into it. And she still can't get over the death of everyone that Oceanside's lost, and eventually talks Cindy, albeit reluctantly, into finding a way to kill the Saviors that at least killed their people, and possibly even Negan while they're at it. Now, Tara, because she's been spending, I feel, or at least she would be spending, a decent amount of time in Oceanside, would hear over this and catch them in the act, and there's really nothing that they can say or do to, like, change what they've said, because Tara caught them red-handed. But the plan to ultimately do something about it backfires on Tara almost instantly. Sort of how it did whenever Tara returned in Season 7 to Oceanside. And now, Natanya and Cindy have a hostage, but under much different circumstances. How will this go? How far will Natanya and Cindy and all of Oceanside go to kill the Saviors this time around? And what do you think will happen further into the story? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how far Cindy and Natanya will go in this timeline, with one, Natanya being alive to exact their revenge on the Saviors who killed their people, and if the plan will last as long or even shorter than it did in canon, with so many changes. This is part 6 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, Tara, being at Oceanside from time to time, overhears Natanya and Cindy's plan about killing the Saviors that killed their people, tries to stop it, and then gets held as a hostage. Meanwhile, back at Alexandria, there are some concerns. Because Olivia, being, kind of in a thing with Tara, I feel, even though, Cindy's around, would start to worry about Tara because she would go on runs to Oceanside before, but she would never be gone this long. Tells this to Rick and Michonne and Carl and whoever else would be at the house, and Rick equally feels like this is something to be taken note of, because he himself, I feel, would know about Tara's occasional trips to Oceanside. So he decides to get some people gathered together to go look for her. Now, Negan has been let out of his cell, finally, and actually gets to hang in the house time to time with Judith, especially caring about being in her company, because you know how much Negan loved kids. So, unfortunately, he's not going to be going. Also, for the main reason, because of Glenn. Speaking of, Glenn is mostly recovered from the slam across his face with Lucille, and he is hanging around Rick and them a good bit, but because of Negan, he's not really ready to be in Negan's true company as of now. He's not tried to kill him for a long while, but his mind's conflicted almost all the time, and that's understandable if you guys have watched my parts and just know how much Maggie meant to Glenn. And Glenn is going to be going to look for Tara because Glenn pretty much owes Tara for saving him back at the prison and returning him to Maggie, at least whenever she was still around. But anyways, he's going because pretty much he owes her. Now, besides Rick and Glenn, Michonne, Daryl, Rosita, Spencer, Eugene, and Jesus are all going to be going to look for Tara. Pretty much all the people, albeit maybe Spencer, who really cared about Tara in the entirety of the series, which makes sense. Back at Oceanside, Natanya knows that Rick and his people are guaranteeingly going to come looking for Tara at some point or another. So, she sends out Beatrice to go to the nearest highway near Oceanside and put up a flag or some kind of banner to let them know where she is, to relay a message for Rick to talk to Natanya about a possible deal. And I'll touch base more on that in a minute. Beatrice, equally wanting revenge against the saviors who killed the people, complies and goes to the nearest highway near Oceanside. At the highway, everything is definitely going to be chaotic here. Rick and his people and Beatrice all meet almost at the exact same time. And Rick and everyone else, along with Beatrice, holds everyone at gunpoint. So, like I said, bit of a chaotic situation. But with 10-1 on Beatrice, she ain't gonna be killing anybody. And that wasn't the end goal. It's more or less to get them all together so that we can go to Oceanside and everything else. Beatrice says that Natanya sent her here for a specific reason, to make a deal with Rick about the saviors. And Rick can kind of already see where this is going and see what Tara might have gotten herself into, and even asked where Tara is, but Beatrice ain't going to be giving off that kind of information. That wasn't her job. Her job was to get Rick and his people here so that way he can get to Oceanside and make the whole deal thing. She doesn't even know what Natanya plans on doing, but she can get a pretty good guess because of the whole saviors killing the Oceanside's people and everything else. So, with no answers, Rick and his people are unfortunately having to comply with Beatrice to going to Oceanside to talk to Natanya. And once they get to Oceanside, they go to the cabin in which Cindy and Natanya and whoever else honestly resided there, and Rick yells out for Natanya to come out and tell him where Tara is. And with Rick here, she does come out along with Cindy and holding Tara as a hostage at gunpoint. And this definitely signifies with Rick on what's about to go down, why this is all happening. Natanya says that there is one way, one singular way, that they can save Tara from dying right now. Give them all the saviors that killed their people, and even lists off a couple names. Arad, Justin, pretty much the saviors that got killed originally. And says that if they bring them those saviors, then all this ends. Or, better yet, bring Negan himself, and all of this ends. Rick tries to calm the situation down, but this is sort of like what happened in the middle of Season 7, except it is way different, because the war with the saviors is already over. So it is much different circumstances here. And Natanya, like before, is very strong in her resolve to not basically listening to Rick. This is going to go her way or no way, basically. And Rick says that they're not going to give up any of the saviors. They're not going to let anybody kill anybody. They're not giving him Negan. And Natanya's not getting what she wants. She can either hand over Tara or, well, things are going to go badly. And Rick points out a gun just to signify his point, with Glenn, Daryl, Jesus, Rosita, and Spencer all doing the same thing. And this definitely is much different than what happened originally when Tara was held at gunpoint. Now, Eugene being there, I feel, even though he cared about Tara, I don't think he would hold out a gun here to the rest of the Oceanside people, because this is getting into early Season 8 territory, and I don't think Eugene would be there yet, like, mentally. Now, where is Michonne, you might ask? She's perched up in a tree like she was in canon, but, like I said, because the events here are so different, and because it's a different part of Oceanside, it's definitely, one, going to be a different tree, possibly, and it's just different things happening. And you'll see exactly what I mean here in a second. Natanya is just about to say something else, and just about to kill Tara regardless of what happens, because she was pretty much ready to do that originally, when a bullet flies through the air, unbeknownst to anyone except hearing a single shot ring out, and Natanya drops to the ground. Tara, after hearing this, because she couldn't see the death because she was held face forward at gunpoint, whirls around to see Natanya shot and knows this had to be Michonne, and whirls a gun around and points it right at Cindy. But having just lost her grandma and being equally on the decision to kill the saviors, because Natanya had already been dead when she wanted this to happen in canon, like near the end of the middle of season 9 in canon, she was ready to do the plan herself. She didn't even need Natanya. So she's ready to do it herself when everybody hears a voice. And a lot of the group, especially Oceanside, was not expecting to hear this voice. And the voice says, "You better tell your people to stand down, or I'll make you all stand down." It's Negan. Why did Negan show up here? Well, Olivia, Carl, and Enid, who I feel would all still be at Alexandria, would be able to watch Judith, and Negan felt like he needed to do this to justify what Simon and everyone else did back in the past, because he knew about Oceanside. He even said so before Simon's death. It was just a small hint. He didn't say Oceanside specifically. But Negan, with his bat and everything, proves to everyone that he is dead serious in what he's about to say, and says that he had no plan in doing what happened to Oceanside. That was Simon and Rot and Saviors acting behind his back, basically, and tells everybody to stand down, and that killing his people will not justify anything. And he's not looking to take over communities anymore. Now, Rick, hearing this, is proud of Negan, but he was not expecting Negan to do this behind his back. And Glenn, he truly does not know how to feel about this. He's tried all this time since the last time he tried to kill Negan, especially after getting slammed in the face with his bat, to get away from him. And here Negan is. And it does not sit well with Glenn. Will he actually try to kill Negan again and succeed, or even get slammed in the face again? Or has the rivalry between them finally been solved? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how Glenn will react now that Negan is here once again in his presence to try and stop whatever's going on at Oceanside. And if Glenn's feud with Negan has ended even earlier than Negan and Maggie's current feud, or if it is just spiked up once again with Negan being here. This is part 7 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, in the last episode, Negan showed up at the last minute whenever Rick was trying to solve things with Natanya and them, but Natanya got herself killed, and Cindy was still trying to exact the plan to kill the saviors who killed their people, but then Negan showed up. And everyone thinks now that he is either A, going to kill all of them and return to his old ways, or, try and save all of them, or he is here to exact some kind of revenge against Glenn or something. But Negan shakes any doubts of why he's here by saying that he's not just here to redeem himself with Glenn anymore, and he's not here just to redeem himself with Rick anymore. He's here to redeem himself with everybody, and that includes Oceanside's people, who he did not know that, he knew that Simon and Arat and everybody killed the men and boys of Oceanside, but they more or less did it behind his back, so he had no control over it. But he's here now because he wants to show that he has made all the saviors stand down and that he is ready to make amends in any kind of way for what he and his men have done. And Negan also says, jokingly, that Judith is in good hands with Carl, Enid, and Olivia. So there's no worries about him, leaving anything, considering the fact that whenever Rick and them were leaving, Negan was watching Judith. As I said, if you guys want to check that out, small detail. Rick smiles knowing that Negan even cares, and knowing that Negan really has changed. And this is far sooner than his original counterpart, because of the torture, basically, that Glenn brought onto him. Glenn even has to think about this for a second. Glenn's mind is finally starting to clear up, knowing that Negan really just was under a bad mindset whenever he did what he did to Maggie, and thinks about talking to him after the matter with Oceanside is solved, because he feels like he needs to definitely talk to Negan at this point. Cindy, who has listened to all of this and knows where Negan's coming from, and knows that it was genuinely not his fault, and hearing the fact that Simon is dead, but not Arat or any of the other saviors, decides to hold off proceedings and realizes that if this goes on, nobody's going to win, and says that peace will be restored just as long as Oceanside is given time to grieve over their losses. After everyone is getting ready to leave, Glenn pulls Negan aside and says that he wants to have a word with him. And Negan, feeling kind of unsure about this, still decides to go with it. Then Glenn smiles, which also throws off Negan, because the last time he saw Glenn smile, it was when he was being tortured back at the clearing. But this isn't a cocky smile, this isn't an even smile. This is Glenn being genuine and says, thank you. Thank you? Well, he says thank you because he never thought that Negan would go to this length to redeem himself, and knows now that Negan was 100% not meaning to kill Maggie. And not that it was Daryl's fault, but kinda was. But even with all that said, and knowing how serious Negan is for changing, he can't forgive him. He just can't. Maggie, and once again he says, Maggie just meant too much to him. And it's not something that can possibly ever be forgiven. But he's trying. And this is the conversation that Maggie had with Negan at the end of season 11. But this is much sooner. This is getting into season 8 territory. And this is Glenn and Negan having this conversation 3 seasons early, instead of Maggie and Negan right at the end of The Walking Dead, or, the original The Walking Dead. You guys get what I mean. But Glenn says that even though he can't forgive Negan, and even though this is something that he probably cannot promise, he's trying to forgive him. And he doesn't have to worry about Glenn killing him anymore. He's done with that. He just wants to mourn Maggie in peace and just make sure that everybody's on the same side. Negan really understands where Glenn is coming from, and is glad that Glenn has not gone down the vengeful route and turn that he did, and that it's actually been simmered to a way where no one dies anymore, for now. Whenever everyone gets back to Alexandria, peace is slowly getting restored, and I mentioned mostly all the details of what happened after the Saviors and everything else, but here's something interesting. Sasha, she's still alive and on her own. And every now and again, she'll go to check on Glenn, because she cared about him, and knew how much he cared for Maggie, and was around Maggie a lot whenever she was still alive, and often sees him crying, mourning the loss of not only his wife, but his unborn baby. And the weight of it, a lot of the time, even though he's never acted on it to kill Negan anymore, it just really hurts to see Glenn like this. And Sasha realizes that Glenn's not alone here. She has lost people too, and she doesn't want to say this, but she understands that even though she didn't lose, like a relationship and a baby, she still lost people she cared about. Tyrese, Bob, Abraham. So she gets where Glenn is coming from. And over time, visiting him a bunch more, they actually begin to get a little love interest. And with their celebrated similarities of losing people, like, in such similar ways, this actually makes Sasha and Glenn a very likable love romance. And before that whole Sasha and Rosita and Glenn thing, like I said before, that was way too silly in my first What If Negan Killed Maggie, so I'm rectifying that here. Now we get into Season 9 territory. The whole bridge sequence, like the majority of my other stories, is going to be dealt with much easier because there's far more people, and even though we don't have Jadis and her people, and we have plenty of saviors, we don't have Oceanside killing the saviors, so things are dealt with a lot smoother here, and Rick gets to stay. Then we get the 6-year time skip. I know I'm skipping through that and might feel like I'm skipping through kind of important details, but with how the story's going, it's necessary. Anyways, you get the 6-year time skip with Judith, Rick, Michonne, Carl, and Enid all welcoming Yumiko and her group into the fray, and peace and everything is going pretty friggin' well so far. And Sadiq is still around, and he also welcomes Yumiko and her people too. Aaron also does not lose his arm here because there was never any savior problems or anything like that. So, that's, even though him getting the metal arm was cool and everything, I'm not saying that he's not going to get the metal arm in this story, which is something I've never really done, have him get it later in the story than his original counterpart, but it will happen in this story. Spoiler alert. And Eric is also still alive as well. With the whole Eugene and Rosita thing, I have to take a page out of my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, because that's the details that I have to offer, because Spencer is still around. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about and didn't watch that episode, basically with Spencer being around, that means that Eugene might still fall here, but Spencer would be around to likely catch him. And that means that Eugene would not hurt his leg, and Spencer would lure them away to shoot the flare gun to make sure that Eugene and Rosita were safe. Now, who goes to the cemetery? Yumiko and Magnus still go, Glenn and Sasha, and the rest are Rick, Michonne, Daryl, Jesus, Aaron, and Eric. So there's the whole group going to the cemetery. Might feel like I'm going a little fast here, but as I said, with parts in the story, that's just kind of how it goes. Now, for the cemetery, Sasha being there is a huge, huge help, because that means that any and all Whisperers or zombies alike are going to instantly be intercepted if they get close to being able to kill Jesus, which means that Jesus lives in this story too. Now, we get to the bridge sequence, which goes as you would expect with far more people, and Lydia is unmasked. Now, since Rick has not lost anyone close to him, because this is far later of a story, because think about it, this story's plot started at the beginning of season 7, so Carl is still around and everything, and Michonne's still around, so Rick's not going to have any second thoughts about sparing or killing Lydia, so she is imprisoned as a pretty easy decision. Now, with Benjamin being around, the story's going to go a little different for when Henry gets involved, because Henry does not get into trouble here, but I discussed that this means that Henry and Lydia would not get involved in my What If Rick Spared Shane remake. But the fact is, spoiler alert, with Maggie not being around, that means that the whole Elijah and Lydia thing is not going to happen, and Henry and Lydia are still going to get together in a different way. What do I mean by that? Well, I feel that even though Henry would be able to stay out of trouble with Benjamin around, because I feel he would stay to make sure his brother's doing the right thing, because, I feel that when Daryl interrogates Lydia, that Henry would overhear this, and this would actually spark their bond a little. But Henry wouldn't be imprisoned, because, again, he didn't do anything, he didn't drink and basically being stupid. But Henry and Lydia are going to get together, except it's going to be under different terms. Now, with the whole Alden and Luke getting kidnapped by Alpha thing, that Alden and Luke are still around, but I'm going to make things a little different here, and not just make it a clean cut of the original and other stories. I'm going to say that since these two characters are still around, Justin and Arot are the two to get kidnapped this time. And we get into the entrance of Alpha and the Whisperers, with two different people being kidnapped. Now, this poses an interesting question. With two saviors, a very unlikable one from Arot, because of the whole Oceanside and everything else thing, and Justin, will they be able to be saved like Luke and Alden were? Or will they be killed and pushed to the side? And how will the threat with Alpha go in this timeline with so many changes and so many characters living? And that's where we leave things for the moment. Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be getting into the introduction of Alpha and how the threat with her and the Whisperers is truly going to be dealt with. This is Part 8 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Hope you guys have been enjoying the story so far, and without further ado, let's get into it. Justin and Arot, as I discussed at the end of the last episode, are going to be kidnapped because they're still around, and it feels right to mix it up a bit with them still around and put them in the regards of being kidnapped by Alpha in the woods instead of Luke and Alden. Just to switch things up and not make it too much like a carbon copy of the original. Now, back at Hilltop, Lydia still does meet Henry, except it's under different circumstances because Henry doesn't get into trouble. But, just a fair warning, a lot of this is going to be a carbon copy of the Whisperer saga in my What If Rick Didn't Kill Shane, or, What If Rick Spared Shane remake. So if there's a bunch of copies of that, then that's why, because I have no choice. It's how the story will go. But Negan does talk to Lydia, and Negan's under much better terms than the last story. So that's different, at least. Alpha and the Whisperers show up then to Hilltop, wanting Lydia back, and Rick goes down to talk to her instead of Daryl, and basically says that same thing as Daryl did, that Alpha can't have her. And this Rick is much different than my What If Rick Spared Shane Rick, because, he really hasn't lost anybody. Carl's still around, Michonne's still around, Judith's still around. So this Rick is still serious about not giving over Lydia, but not as serious. Now with Glenn and Sasha there, that makes something interesting occur. Because the both of them have had a love connection recently after the whole ordeal at Oceanside. And Glenn says that the best thing they can do right now to stop this from escalating into something further, irony, is just take Alpha out right now. And even recommends this to Sasha. Sasha holsters her gun and gets ready to fire, but Daryl and Michonne stop her because, who knows, Alpha could have hostages that they don't know about. And it was only by mere luck, and thanks to Sasha, that Jesus was able to come out of that cemetery alive. So, if they do this now, it could get into something worse than what they think it will. And, like they said, there could be hostages, and they weren't wrong. Just then, Whisperers come out with Justin and Arat instead of Luke and Alden. And this just confirms that they gotta hand over Lydia, or something bad's going to happen. And even though the Saviors were originally their enemies, and they're kind of Negan's men, there's no Oceanside to worry about killing them, and Rick's group has more or less accepted them at this point. And Rick, knowing they don't really have another choice in the matter, says that they gotta hand over Lydia. And as I said, Lydia and Henry still have a little bit of a love connection. Not nearly as strong as this point in the story, but kind of close to that. So, Enid, along with Carl, who's still around, and I feel maybe Sadiq, maybe some other residents, are the ones that go to find Henry and Lydia. And this is actually pretty interesting. We get a talk with Carl and Henry, which is something that I bet a lot of people would have wanted to see, and something that I've never really touched on. And it's sad to see that many people compare Henry to Carl. But anyways, they get a talk, and Carl basically is much more... The talk goes through much more nicely to get Lydia back to Alpha, because it's Carl. So, like I said, something interesting to see. But anyways, Lydia's handed over, and all that goes as you would expect, except with much more characters. Now, back at the Kingdom, as I've discussed before, nobody has been killed. So, whenever Ezekiel and all of them go out for the movie and everything, there's going to be far more people, including Shiva, Richard, Morgan, Benjamin, most likely, if he was not already at Hilltop. So yeah, much more people. Now, back at Hilltop, Negan, like my other remake, wants to go and find Lydia, because Alpha is not someone that he thinks that Lydia should be around for obvious reasons. Daryl and Connie also join, and this sparks the same idea as the previous story, with Negan and Daryl planning their way to get Beta, at least. One, to get Lydia back, obviously, but another to get Beta. And that eventually brings them to the same building as episode 13 of season 9, where Negan has the same fight that he does with Beta as in the comics. And if you guys are confused why I'm using my previous story as a reference, watch my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, and you'll come to understand what I mean. I just don't want to repeat previously used content, is all. So, if that's what you guys are wondering, then that's good. But when we get to this point in the story, there's a difference. Like I've shown other differences just now if you guys didn't catch on, but here's a big difference. Negan's bat, whenever he's bashing it against Beta's back, it takes even less strikes before it busts, because it's been through way more torment because of Glenn doing it, like burning it and doing the torture that he did to Negan at the clearing. So it breaks much faster, which leaves Beta with more strength. So when Daryl makes his move, he doesn't stab him in the eyes. Instead, he stabs him lower, but he thinks that he stabbed him in the eyes because that was the end goal. And if you guys didn't watch the original season 10, that's what happened originally, but that's not going to happen here. Even though Beta's still off guard, you could argue, but yeah. Anyways, Daryl and Negan still push Beta out to the Horde and everything, and you'd think that this kills him. But, spoiler alert, it doesn't. They just think that it has. But this ain't gonna be like my previous story. That's where it changes. So, spoiler alert, Beta will come back. It's just going to, take a while because he's surrounded by a horde and he just got pushed out of a building. But he survived getting pushed down an elevator shaft, so yeah. Alpha, thinking that Beta's dead, knows that she has to definitely show that the Whisperers mean business. And her whole exchange with Ezekiel and going to the kingdom plays out as you would expect. Yeah, basically, my What If Rick Spared Shane remake and original parts of the story are going to be the same for this episode, and they already have. But who gets kidnapped? Rick, Michonne, because she's actually alive here, like my other story and the previous story. Negan, Daryl, Glenn, and Sasha. And by previous story, I meant the original story. Sorry if I'm, getting off track here. Anyway, Alpha goes and shows Rick instead of Daryl, for any of you who watched the original story and not my remakes or my other stories, shows Rick the Horde and says that because of Beta's supposed death, this is to show extremely that the Whisperers mean business. Tells him to go to the border and they'll see what she means. They pick up Sadiq and they go to the border where they see 12 heads. Now, who they see is definitely not happy. 4 of the victims are original victims. Adney, Rodney, and 2 of the other names that I can't know. Oh, one's Frankie, and the other one I don't know. Just couldn't remember one of them for a second. But anyways, the main victims are Gavin, Justin, Arot, Eric, Jared, and Ken. Besides that, the other 4 are basically just nobodies. So, that's probably why I couldn't remember the other names. But because of Beta's supposed death, this is where my other remake plays into account with the similarities again, because I said 12 heads. That's only 10. There's 2 other important victims, Morales and Olivia. Because, yeah, Beta's death charge more heads. You'd think it would be higher than 2, but I feel like 2 would be way more than enough, like my previous remake. So, what will happen now? How far will the Whisperer War go this time with other people surviving and different victims being killed in this story? And do you think that Beta's return to the Whisperer army could pose even more trouble with everyone thinking that he's dead? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how the threat with Alpha will go after the Pike scene, and if Beta still being alive, even though we have no idea where he is, will mean that the group's eventual plan to kill Alpha will fail. This is part 9 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, if you guys don't remember the Pike scene from the last episode, it entailed some small characters for the most part, but the main ones were Eric and Olivia. So, even though there is upset people and everything else, and upset emotions with the Pike scene, Tara and Aaron are the main 2 that are affected by it, because, people that they loved. But other than that, nothing really too major. Now, like my other remake, the whole Hilltop and Kingdom go in there and everything else will not happen because the Kingdom and all the other communities are basically in perfect shape. There's really nothing that happened to them. The Savior's threat was very undermining here because of what went down. And because Negan has been redeemed so much earlier, it doesn't matter that he didn't save Judith out in the snow and everything else, because he's been redeemed far earlier. So even if this were to happen, it wouldn't matter because he's already proved his worth. Back at the Hilltop, Eugene is doing the whole radio thing like he does, and that goes as you would expect. Then we hit season 10 territory because we're already at that standpoint. And we get to the whole training day thing, which plays out as you would expect, except some characters that are there have different things that happen to them. There's a lot more characters that survived. But honestly, aside from that, it goes as you would expect. I feel that even if there were characters that survived and people with different backgrounds, that it would go the same way. Then we get to the whole satellite and the fire thing. That goes the same way. Then we get to a change. Alpha is all alone whenever she walks out because there's no Carol, no Morgan. There's no instance, I feel, that someone would be out there at the same time as Alpha. So, small change kinda, but still worth pointing out. And also, like before, since Beta is presumably dead, because I'm gonna keep saying it, he is coming back. Since Beta's presumably dead, Alpha promotes Gamma to the new Beta, like before. Because that's how it would work. And this would only be further proven that this is the case whenever Mary's sister tries to kill Alpha. So if she wasn't Beta before, by some weird instance, then she would definitely be pronounced Beta here. And also, since Beta is not around, Alpha would mourn Lydia not returning because, she didn't kill her herself, and no one would find out Alpha's lie. So, there's that. And she also really she not only misses Lydia, but also Beta because she really cared about him and everything else. So, she mourns both of them alone, except she knows that Lydia's alive, and doesn't know that Beta's alive. Ezekiel's cancer is eventually found out by the group, and that goes as you would expect. Back at Alexandria, Alpha begins sending swarms of walkers to attack, but the waves are dealt with much easier here because of the communities being in much better shape, first off, and second off, with there being so many more people alive. So that threat is dealt with much easier. And since Michonne is actually around here, and this part of the story would not really be changed, we get the scene with Aaron and Michonne at the bridge. Except Aaron is much nicer here, even though Eric's dead, because he, one, hasn't lost his arm, and hasn't had the character development that his original has. It's happening way later. And he does still get paired with Negan, but since Negan's been redeemed far earlier, and as I just said with Aaron, he's not going to hate Negan here. He's not going to hate being paired up with him. Sure, he's not the fondest of the idea, but he goes with it because he knows how much Negan has redeemed himself over the years and everything. Because it happened 2-3 seasons early. So, yeah. Now, remember how I said in previous episodes that even though Aaron did not lose his arm in Season 9, that he was going to eventually? Well, that's about to pan out here. During the fight with the walkers, like originally, Aaron still does get blind, and then get bit. So, 2 negatives. He gets bit right on the arm, and Negan says that the only choice is to cut off the arm and amputate it. Otherwise, he's gonna die. So, Negan gladly does the job because, Aaron's blind and never seen anyone amputate their own arms before. So he does the job, and for consistency's sake, and just for the sake of the show, I'm going to say that Aaron still gets the metal arm, but as for the spike part, I'll leave that to you guys whether that happens, because it's not really the hugest deal. It's just a small thing, but yeah. Now, with the whole Alpha situation, Carl, Enid, Glenn, Sasha, Carol, Tara, Negan, Aaron, Benjamin, and Richard eventually all start to agree with each other that a plan must be made to kill Alpha, and they even begin talking amongst themselves. First, the talks are small, and then all of them come together. Eventually, it brings more people, Spencer being one of them, and since Rosita's along with them, she follows suit, and then Daryl, slowly realizing that his plan could work, and then Carol, Morgan, and Ezekiel. And eventually, we have a whole crowd of people just planning to do something about Alpha, because this has gone too far. Rick, eventually, with hearing about how the talk is going, and realizing that everybody's right, agrees that a plan must be made to stop Alpha. This is basically the Negan situation whenever Rick was finally forced to fight Negan, except it's with Alpha here, so a little change there. Eventually, Gamma, the new Beta, arrives and says that Alpha wishes to meet them at the border for a talk. And Rick is definitely ready for this, because he now knows the perfect way to kill Alpha and to end this once and for all. And especially since the second-in-command Beta isn't around, this gives them an even better chance. And the plan will go as such. While Rick, Michonne, Carl, Daryl, Morgan, Rosita, Negan, Sasha, and Aaron all go to talk to Alpha, because they're going to do this the way that Alpha wants for now, to make her think that she's actually in control and everything. They'll listen to whatever she has to say, but just whenever she thinks she's getting her way, Glenn, Carol, Tara, Enid, Ezekiel, Spencer, Benjamin, and Richard will all come out, seemingly out of nowhere, fire their guns at Alpha and any Whisperers there are, kill them on the spot, and then that will leave every other Whisperer completely leaderless and able to be stopped. So, seemingly good plan. And this sparks Rick to make the same speech that he did at the beginning of the original Season 8, about starting tomorrow right now, and that they've already won. So, the plan seemingly is set. The stage is set for meeting Alpha at the border, like my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, but with so many other characters surviving, with so many characters having different backgrounds, and with Beta still being out there, how will this spark into the plan this time? Do you think that the plan will work, or do you think Beta is out there somewhere, leading other Whisperer survivors, and leading a path towards revenge? Hey guys, it's Nick here, and today we will be seeing how meeting Alpha at the border will go, with Rick having the perfect plan to bring her down. And today we will finally get the revelation as to where Beta has been for all of this time. This is part 10 to the remake of What If Negan Killed Maggie. So, to start up, if you don't remember the groups that were staging the plan against Alpha thing, with like Rick and everything else, then watch the last video. To basically sum it up, we have Rick, who is taking one half of all their group to go see Alpha, where she talks about being on their land, and this time, other than my other remake, now they've been on the land twice. One during the fire, and then again with Michonne and Aaron. But there was no need to go on their land for Winter Storm, so that's not an issue. But we have Rick's group dealing with that, while Glenn leads a group to wait for the perfect opportunity, or till Alpha shuts her mouth, and then kill all the Whisperers on sight. End the war right then and there. So, with Rick and them talking to Alpha, Glenn is the farthest out to make sure he hears, or at least sees, whenever it's the perfect time to make a move. And he's just about to give the signal, when just then, everybody stops, including Glenn, because they all hear something. They can't place it, but it is coming from all around them, and every one of Glenn's group is sitting still. So, the fact that the group hears rustling of leaves in the dark woods definitely sets them on edge. This could mean one of two things. The Whisperers caught on to their plans, or walkers in general. Just then, Spencer collapses to the ground, holding his guts. He's been stabbed. What? That means that, for sure, the Whisperers must have caught on to their plan. Right after, a Whisperer is seen, the one who exactly stabbed Spencer. So that pretty much is a dead confirmation. Then, Richard falls. He is the next one to be killed by a second Whisperer. So already, they've lost 2 of their people. Glenn cowers behind a tree, not knowing as to where these Whisperers could have came from. How did they know about this? Was it too many people? Is that how they figured out the plan? Or is there more to this than meets the eye? Just then, Glenn sees someone rushing towards him. A dark, looming shadow that is running towards him at a ferocious speed. And it's a big guy, too. And this sets Glenn on edge, but he can't see, because of how dark it is, who exactly the figure is. But before he can figure it out, he is then slammed in the head to the ground and hits the bark edge of the tree. And this would be a very bad thing, because Glenn would have just been recovering and everything from past marks on his face from the bat against his face. Not the head, but still, this would be a big injury. And who did this? Beta, with 2 red scars right under his eyes. Yep, I told you guys Beta was alive and he'd be coming back. It wasn't Whisperers knowing about the plan. It was Beta all along. And if you guys are confused by this, it's because Negan... I took a page out of my other remake to say that Negan and Daryl would go on the same plan and fight Beta together like Daryl did in episode 13 of season 9. But since Negan's bat had been through way more torture and peril, it took only 3 strikes instead of 6 before the bat broke. So, yeah, that means that Daryl didn't get the stab in both Beta's eyes and he actually survived. And you know what's funny? Since Brandon is still around in this timeline, because there wouldn't have been an instance as to him getting killed and killing the mother and son and everything else, that means that he would most likely have the backup bat that we saw in season 10. So, Negan would be getting the bat back so quick between episodes, I feel, that it would be very confusing as to when he got it, but that's why I'm here. It would be so fast you would basically not even know what happened. But, yeah. So, Negan would have another bat by this point, so if Beta were to have encountered him, he'd be confused to the fact as him having another bat. Anyway, besides that, Beta, now having made his full appearance and presence known, is looming over Glenn right now. And now everybody knows that this wasn't the Whisperer's plan. Beta survived, and this was his plan. Beta then tells the Whisperers to come out and attack. Just then, a bunch of walkers and Whisperers seemingly come out of nowhere. It was as if this whole thing had been staged up by Beta. Keep in mind, Beta did not return to Alpha yet, so Alpha does not know that Beta is alive. This is still unknown. Carol, Ezekiel, Tara, Enid, and Benjamin, all being there and the only ones other than Glenn alive, fend off the Whisperers and Walkers, the best of their ability, killing all of them with a bit of a fight, but in the end, the battle is not too hard. But the looming number of the Whisperers and Walkers, both of which having been Beta's original in Season 9 and added, is a bit of a fight, but not truly a threat. Anyway, Glenn fights Beta, and as much as you think that Glenn probably would not stand a living chance here, keep in mind, he did hold his own against Abraham for a substantial amount of time. Granted, he wasn't able to beat him, but he was able to topple a frickin' soldier. Abraham was a soldier, and Glenn still held his own. But Beta is, I feel, much stronger than Abraham, if not maybe just a little bit stronger. So as much as Glenn would be able to hold his own, especially surviving for this long, it sadly still wouldn't be enough. And Beta would still hold the edge overall. But, like I said, Glenn does put up a fight here, and especially with everything that he's been through, it definitely shows for his growth over the past years and everything else. And soon enough, we see a more injured Glenn than we have ever seen. Can Glenn really survive here? Will Alpha ever figure out that Beta's alive and catch on to Rick's plan? Or is Beta's return here going to make things worse for both the Whisperers and Rick's group? Hey guys, Nick here. Today, we will be ending off the Whisperer saga and see if Glenn will survive his encounter with Beta, who is surprisingly returned from his supposed death, or if this is really the end of one of the best characters of The Walking Dead. This is part 11 to What If Negan Killed Maggie the remake. Now, back to the fight between Glenn versus Beta. Even though Glenn has been shown to be able to hold his own against the likes of Abraham, Beta is in a whole different league. And slowly but surely, Glenn loses any opportunity to even land a strike, a gunshot, a slice with a knife, you name it. He just loses his advantage because Beta slowly starts to overpower him. Rick and his group, well, since they were the ones who were talking to Alpha at the border, Rick is concerned, because by this point, Glenn should have, or at least part of his group, should have fired at Alpha, and this could have been over by now. What's going on? And Alpha is beginning to grow a little bit suspicious, because she's already gone through with everything that she's supposed to say about the border and everything else, and obligations that the group must follow, and the group's still there. It's like they're expecting something. So, she is beginning to grow suspicious herself. Beta, now seemingly overpowered Glenn, is beginning to get ready to end him. But just before he can, an axe seemingly flies out of nowhere and kills one of the only Whisperers of Beta's group, at least, left alive, and kills him. And everybody else is there. They're fighting whatever Whisperers and Walkers are there, so couldn't have been any of them. Beta turns just in time to see a tiger leaping towards him and flying straight at him. This was Shiva, and, Shiva couldn't have thrown the axe. Someone's with the tiger. Beta uses his 2 knives to defend himself from Shiva's teeth whenever Shiva leaps onto him. Still collapses him to the ground because this was a surprise attack, but the knives stop Shiva from gnashing her teeth into Beta's skull. Jerry then shows up. It's revealed that Jerry is the one who came with Shiva and came in with the save with the axe. Because with everything that's going on and Ezekiel going this time to the border, Jerry felt it in his duty to save his king. Because Jerry was loyal like that, even after Ezekiel said that no more king stuff. And by this point, Ezekiel's still his kingly state. So he accepts this because he hasn't lost his kingdom people and everything else. Alpha, growing even more suspicious and hearing the tiger roar and hearing more muffled noises from the woods, is about to give a signal for Whisperers to go out and check. But just then, a spear flies through the air and goes straight into Alpha's throat. And this was definitely a surprise. It wasn't anyone from Rick's group. It was 2 more surprise figures, Henry and Lydia. Dun dun dun. Now you guys might be asking, why? For number 1, why Henry and Lydia? And for number 2, why the spear? Well, here's the thing. Remember how I said that Henry and Lydia would be together, just under different circumstances? Well, since Henry survived and didn't have to go through the whole Pike incident, he still is in a good relationship with Lydia. And this is season 10 territory, mind you. So, Henry is still alive here and everything else. And I feel that after the Pike scene, Henry would definitely try to convince Lydia that Alpha is, at this point, a monster. And mother or not, this has gone too far. And Lydia did give her a choice. If you guys remember, Lydia and Alpha talked back at the Kingdom when the whole movie thing was going on. So the fact that Lydia agrees with this, plus the fact she gave her mother a choice, just makes her agree with Henry more, that something needs to be done. So when the plan arises with killing Alpha, Henry and Lydia, while Jerry goes off with Shiva on their own, Henry and Lydia decide to go off on their own. And that's where this scene comes into play. Lydia looks at her dying mother and says that she gave her a choice and she chose poorly. The Pike scene was taking it too far. And says that she's sorry, but this is how it has to be. Alpha, confused with everything at this point, and barely even able to hold back any emotions, barely able to even express any emotions because of her dying breaths, only utters 2 words. Me too, as to signify she's sorry too. But nobody knows what this means until, with the last bit of her dying strength, Alpha shoots off a shot from her shotgun, and boom! But who did the shot hit? Because last time I had it hit Lori because she was still around. But since this what if happened so much later, who does it hit? Henry. And nobody knows who it hit until Henry, who was sitting right next to Lydia, his head is blown completely into smithereens. Blood, brain, everything everywhere. It's a disgusting mess. And this would be like Negan killing that Whisperer whenever he saved Daryl after killing Alpha and everything. But think of it like that. Besides that, we never really saw anyone else get shot in the head with a shotgun. Lydia, at this point, doesn't want to give her mother the luxury of dying slowly. She's going to kill her personally. She shoots a bullet from the gun in her pouch, and boom. Alpha, if she was not dead before, she's dead now. So that ends Alpha. And at this point, Rick, finally finding his strength to talk and even do anything, shouts to the rest of the group to advance forward and attack. And this is where the plan begins to take fold. But nobody knows about Glenn's group yet, or Beta. Just Glenn's group. So, with Rick's group, bullet after bullet, attack after attack, every Whisperer and Walker throughout the entire area, barring Glenn and Beta's part, that right side of the woods, which I'm going to put it as, that group is left to the side. But everything else, everyone else, dead. Every Whisperer, Walker, dead. And the only ones left are Rick's people. Besides, as I said, Glenn and Beta's group. Which, at this point, after killing all the Whisperers and Walkers in this area, Rick decides to go out and check out from where the roar came. Because guaranteeingly, Glenn's group had trouble, and that's why they heard the roar and everything. Beta is still a threat, and Shiva is still nomming down on both of Beta's blades. But if you think that I'm just going to bring Beta back like this just to have him killed like this, nah, not gonna happen. We're gonna have it be something dramatic, as it already has been showing. So while Shiva's nomming down on one of Beta's blades, Beta gets the strength, finally, to get his other blade and stab it straight into Shiva's chest. And then, with the rest of his strength, pushes Shiva off of him. And with this stab straight through Shiva's chest, Shiva's dead. So, yeah. Short-lived surprise attack, but it was at least something like whenever Carl was saved by Shiva. Figured I might as well recreate it. Beta, now angry at the surprise attack and finding his strength again, throws one of his knives. And its target, Glenn. Glenn is in complete shock because he didn't know who it was at first until he feels a very sharp pain straight in his chest. The knife was aimed straight at his chest. And with how big Beta's blades are, this would be a very critical attack. Glenn collapses to the ground, and he knows that after the beating that he's taken throughout all the years, and especially right now, that this moment, he's going to die. But if this is the true moment where he should die, he's not going to let his death be in vain. For everyone that he is threatened, for everyone that he's let down, he's going to make sure that he takes this guy who's seemingly come back with him. Beta goes ahead, seeing that Glenn's still alive here, and decides to end it personally on a high note, throwing his other knife to aim it straight at Glenn's head. But as I said, Glenn's going to make sure that he makes this next shot that he's about to fire count. For Maggie, for Sasha, for everyone that he's threatened, let down, and everyone that he has failed and been with up till now, and aims his gun. Sasha and everyone in Rick's group is heading towards the area in which they heard Shiva roar, and are going because Sasha herself is beginning to sense a very foreboding feeling, like something is very wrong, and shouts Glenn's name. And in case you guys didn't know, this is reminiscent to Michonne shouting Rick before he blew himself up with the bridge and supposedly died. But even though this has that surprise twist to it, it's not gonna be all happy and everything like it was in that particular part. Because, you'll see here, the last words that we hear Glenn shout before he takes true aim and fires his gun, he shouts Maggie's name. And with that, aims his gun, and boom! Fires his shot right as Beta throws his knife. The bullet flies straight over Beta's knife, barely missing it. Because this wouldn't have mattered if the shot had hit his knife, because then the fight would have just been it would have been a standstill. But the knife goes straight into Glenn's head, killing him and throwing him onto the ground. But the bullet, which still went over Beta's blade, goes straight into Beta's shoulder. Now, even though this seems like I completely just killed off Glenn for no reason, no. Sasha and everyone else who has arrived just as this happens, Sasha sees what just went down and Glenn falling to the ground. And because of this, she fires not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 of her sniper bullets. A very angry barrage of 5 sniper bullets straight into Beta's head. And if you guys couldn't tell, he's dead. And after seeing everything that went down from Rick's group and their point of view, there is complete and utter shock and disdain that not only the Beta was alive with all of these other Whisperers, but the fact that most of their people are now dead. Sasha, along with everybody else, is heartbroken to see the likes of Glenn, especially, dead. We now have to mourn the losses of Glenn, Shiva, Richard, Spencer, and Henry. Glenn living longer than any version of him that I've ever had before, and the rest of the group mattering just to fight off Beta's group, and Henry showing up to save Rick's group from Alpha. But in the end, these people's sacrifices were not in vain. Glenn's death meant something here, apart from his original counterpart being mercilessly batted in by Negan. But even though we have lost great characters in this episode, the threat of Alpha and the Whisperers is officially over. So Glenn's death, like I said, was not in vain. And with that, what will happen with the Reapers and Commonwealth still around? Will they even matter? Or will the deaths of these certain people mean that our group is going back to the original story material? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how the rest of this particular story will go now that Alpha and the Whisperers have been dealt with, and with so many changes in the story, and with a good few good characters dying in the last part. This is part 12 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, when I said good characters, Glenn being a key factor in one of them, surviving longer than many of my other stories and playing a crucial part in ending Beta's surprise return and the Whisperers as a whole. But his sacrifice was not in vain, and him, along with several others, died in the last part. Now, I will be covering the rest of Season 10 going into Season 11 in this episode. Now, with the whole Virgil thing, Rick being around, like I've discussed in other stories, if he figured something was up with Virgil, he just ended him. So that's a small part of the story. Now, with Dante still being a threat, unbeknownst to anyone, Carl being around with Sadiq, I feel like a few of my other stories, it wouldn't even be that big a deal. Plus the fact that since the Whisperers were gone, Dante wouldn't really be a big deal anyway. Now with Sasha, if you guys did not already know, I had her and Glenn actually get into a relationship before the whole Whisperer thing, and unbeknownst to anyone at the time, she was pregnant with Glenn's second baby. And as much as I would like to rename him Herschel again, I feel that with Sasha being the mother this time and Glenn dying, I'm going to go with the fact that the baby would be named either Glenn or Glenn Jr. I'm going to go with Glenn Jr. just to... It's pretty much a monument to Glenn, and as much as Herschel wasn't called Herschel Jr., I just feel like Glenn Jr. would be more accurate. But anyways, then we get the whole confusing Rosita, Gabriel, and Sadiq thing, except it's happening a season later. Because Spencer's dead, so Rosita doesn't really have anyone. Then we get the whole meeting princess thing, and then the entrance to the Commonwealth, which would play out the same way, except Ezekiel is still in his king state, because besides Shiva, he hasn't lost anybody. Oh, and Henry. But he still has Benjamin and pretty much all the kingdom, so he's not, like, full king, but he's king enough to the degree in which he hasn't lost it outright. So, yeah. Anyway, the Wardens, without Maggie and Herschel being around, they would end up, like a few of my other stories, getting killed by the Reapers. So, pretty sad, but that's just how it would go, because Maggie pretty much played a crucial part in keeping them alive. So, yeah. Then we get the whole Aaron and Gabriel solo episode, but this time they are accompanied by Jesus. And I think I've done this in a few of my other stories, but to reiterate, Maze, I feel, would get spared here, especially with Jesus around. But as for his brother, there are just some characters that are just a lost cause, and Maze's brother is one of them. So, as much as I'd like to say he lives, it's just, no. Also, a nice little plot here. Tara and Cindy actually get together long-term, because Denise was dead even before the story started, and Olivia's dead, so... And with Tara and Cindy being around, and Tara being alive, I feel would happen. Now, the whole subway tunnel scene doesn't happen, because the Savior's damage to the communities was very tame in this story, among others. But the Reapers are still going to show up, but because Maggie and the Wardens are not a threat to the Reapers and not anywhere, because the Wardens would be dead and Maggie's dead, that means that even though I'd like to say the Reapers don't become a threat here, I feel that Pope would eventually figure out about the communities and know about them, and know that the people there would get in his way, his vision about God and everything else. So he would eventually set up the Hawacha to destroy the communities, or at least the main buildings of all the communities. It would take time to figure it out, but I think Pope would take this time to ensure his vision. And if you don't think that this was what Pope would do, you gotta take a dive into his character to know what he would do. And it's what if. So, yeah. So, the Hawacha would be targeted for the main building at Alexandria, Hilltop, Kingdom, and Oceanside. And when the bombs go off, as much as Pope would like to think that the explosions would destroy the people there and bring walkers to them, whoever's in there is injured, but not killed. And Rick, seeing this as an immediate threat, knows that they gotta get the strongest people they have and find the people that just did this. So, the group would be this. Rick, Michonne, obviously, since she's around. Carl, having one eye, not due to Dante this time, but because he already had it. Negan, with the bat that Brandon gave him, not his original Lucille. Daryl, of course, would be going along, because Daryl. Carol would actually be fighting the Reapers this time around, like my other story. Morgan, with an axe sort of like the one he got from Emil, but it couldn't be that because he's been around, so Fear the Walking Dead would be no. And here's something interesting. Lydia and Benjamin getting together. Because I feel that this would happen, because I feel that Lydia would see this person, Benjamin, as the closest thing she had with Henry. And since it was his brother, I feel that Benjamin would also like Lydia. I just feel that the pair would be good, but it would take time for them to actually get together because Lydia would be mourning Henry. Enid, I feel, would also be going along, accompanying Carl, because she's still around. Now, as much as I want to say that Sasha would be going instantly, there are a few things that stop that. And by a few, I mean a lot. For one thing, she has just got done birthing Glenn Jr., and of course, has to raise him alone. And Sasha has to stew on a lot. Has to stew with the death of Bob, Tyrese, Abraham, Glenn. Too many deaths that Sasha has had to deal with, and she's still around. Feels like a curse, which really hurts her on whether to go with everybody or not. But seeing how people like Judith and Gracie have grown up and everything, and them even volunteering to take care of baby Glenn Jr., I feel that this in turn would motivate her, but it would take a little bit of time. But time was definitely not something that they had on their side, especially with all the explosions. So I feel this would all in turn motivate Sasha once again to pick up her favorite sniper and make her join the group. So, there you go, Sasha's part of the group. Aaron would actually be fighting the Reapers this time around. And Gabriel, since he's around, would be coming along, and he would go like his canon counterpart. Jesus being around, I feel, would go too. And even though I've never really had Maze matter before, I'll say that he goes around this time for story's sake. Tara being alive means that she's going to go along too, and in turn, that means Cindy's going to go along because they're together, because why not? Now, Rosita would be in a similar predicament as to Sasha, but she has less deaths to basically contemplate over. She just has to worry about a baby. And true, she has deaths to try and get over, but not as much as Sasha. But once again, the whole Judith and Gracie thing, that would motivate Rosita. And Sadiq, in turn, would say that he would take care of Coco and everything else. So, with Sadiq especially, this would, like, double motivate Rosita, and she would be part of the team to fight the Reapers. So far we have a much better team to fight the Reapers. Alden, I feel, would go along just for consistency's sake and because he would want to help. Because Alden was a really helpful person when it came to it. Regina would go because she's still around wanting to prove herself. Now, since Connie is still around because we never had to deal with the whole finding the Horde thing and her and Magna getting trapped in the cave and everything, I feel that she would go too, accompanied by Daryl. And this means that her and Daryl would actually get way more time together. So that would in turn make their relationship delve much deeper. Now, Pope was not expecting these people to be alive still, or any people to be alive, and expecting walkers to swarm the communities after the explosions, but he knows that God will aid his people into killing these people in turn. So he's not worried, but we all know how crazy Pope was. Now, even though this is a similar situation about how we get into the Reaper saga from my last remake, there's been some differences, not just characters, but how the Reapers approach the group. But how will the fight go? Do you think that the Reapers will be dealt with as good as they were before? Or do you think that this is how Rick's story, along with everyone else's, will end? Hey guys, Nick here, and today we are getting into the finale of What If Negan Killed Maggie the remake. Hope you guys have enjoyed this remake as well as my other one, because I definitely enjoy, revisiting a series that I feel needs touched more upon. But anyways, if you guys did not watch the last part, we are getting into the Reaper battle, which the setup is different since the subway tunnel scene wasn't needed. Now, Regina takes the death of that one old guy in the subway tunnel because Regina's alive, and the guy in the subway tunnel would just kind of die without anyone to come and save him. It doesn't really matter anyway, because small character. May's serving a kind of bigger role, but not really, being a part here, unfortunately takes the death of Cole. Now, when it comes to the likes of the first Reaper, Michael Turner, Negan fights him alone because there's no Maggie or Glenn. But he does have the bat that Brandon gave him, so kind of counts for something, but still, on his own, it's a tall order for Negan to be able to beat the Reaper by himself. But he still does put up a good fight. But luckily for him, Negan does not die, because Alden being there saves him like Negan saved Maggie from the Reaper. So, kind of a role reversal. And because the context and how the story has gone, especially in this particular timeline, I do not see Alden getting injured here. So that means that he will not die. I mean, it didn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things, because Alden wasn't the hugest character. He still serves some purpose, but the fact that he remains actually makes whatever story they had going for him worth it. Now, Nicole's, the next Reaper to die, would not only be killed by Gabriel, but Aaron too, because Aaron's around for the fight with the Reapers this time. And this would either lead to Aaron getting injured instead of Gabriel and Aaron not getting injured at all, or Gabriel still getting injured. It could have gone any one of those ways. Now, Daryl and Connie are the ones together who fight against Leah, because before it was Daryl and Leah, and Daryl knew Leah. But here, like some of my other stories, Daryl does not just meet Leah alone, he meets her with Connie this time around. And for the majority of my stories also, Daryl has not yet met Leah, because Rick hasn't blown up the bridge or anything like that. And Dog is still around Leah all the time, because since Daryl wasn't out there, he never met Dog, so he didn't get a chance to really get involved with him. So, there's that. And Leah, since also because of this, having Dog around all this time, has trained him with the Reapers. So, she sends Dog to attack them both. But surprisingly, he doesn't. Instead, Dog just runs right up to Daryl and Connie, and they both comfort him. And it's a really nice and kind of awkward moment. And kind of funny if you want to put it in the perspective of the Reaper's losing this advantage, and Leah is annoyed at this because she thought for sure this would work. Connie, using Leah's surprise to her advantage, uses a slingshot and fires it straight into Leah's arm. And as much as you think this would not hurt, I'm not so sure about that. But Leah doesn't have time to stew on this, or anyone else who would be watching this, because Daryl cuts attention with his crossbow and kills Leah right then and there. Because, as I said, they have not met, so there'd be no hesitation. The next Reaper, the one who got kicked into the fire by Pope, will be the one who fights against Tara and Cindy, because Tara's still alive here, so her being alive and more part of things would mean that Cindy would be around more, and they really got into a relationship, and yeah, that's how it would be. So, they are somewhat able to hold an advantage, but unfortunately that advantage does not last long, because one of the arrows that the Reaper fires goes straight into Tara's neck, killing her almost instantly. So, even though Tara lived basically 2 seasons longer than her original counterpart, she unfortunately dies here. Cindy, completely shocked and heartbroken by this because she's had way more feelings with Tara and a deeper relationship, fires an arrow of her own and kills the Reaper. Carl and Enid fight 2 more of the Reapers, the next 2 that died in canon, but like I said, the dynamics and story are way different here. So some Reapers that were killed differently in different scenes, some of those scenes don't even happen in the Reaper. They're all fighting at once. Especially if you guys watch my last remake, that's just how it goes. Now, even though Carl and Enid are significantly injured, they are able to take down the 2 Reapers that attack. So, neither one of them is killed here, but they are significantly injured. Now, Lydia and Benjamin, who are actually a thing here, weirdly, because I even myself never thought that I would pair those 2 together, fight the next 2 Reapers that go in line. And they are able to hold their own because Morgan taught them both the stick, so I feel that would play especially to both of their advantages. Speaking of Morgan, he's the next one to take down one of the Reapers, and successfully wins because it's Morgan. Especially if he were to stay around Rick and his people, he definitely would be able to hold his own. Negan and Alden, because like I said, since there's no Maggie, Negan and Alden would be basically Negan and Maggie, and they would go off to the cabin or help anyone who needs help. So, even though the dynamics are a little bit different, it definitely plays more to the advantage because Negan and Alden knew each other far more than Negan and Maggie. Now, Daryl has the same fight with Austin, because I don't really see anything changing how that fight went, except for the fact that Connie is there to provide backup, but considering the fact that Daryl was able to take out Austin with kinda not that much difficulty, Connie would only be, small backup. Maybe whenever Austin stabbed Daryl with the machete or something, that'd be, a small instance for backup. Now, Jensen, never really amounting to anything in the original story, instead of getting taken out by Jesus like my other remake, Carol, being there, takes him out herself. Now, even though Jesus did not take out Jensen, we still get the awesome fight from my other remake, Jesus versus Carver, a fight that I'm sure many Walking Dead fans would have loved to see if they actually, kept Jesus around. Now, even though Jesus is a great fighter and everything else, the Reapers and their combat is much more unique, so Carver wins the fight overall, but he is significantly injured. But before he can land a finishing blow, Sasha being there and around the area, saves Jesus and snipes Carver straight in the head, ending him instantly. Now, the Reaper priest instead of being taken out by Gabriel, is once again accompanied by Aaron. And whatever small hope the Reaper priest had of turning Gabriel to their side, with Aaron, that small percentage of hope is just dialed down by infinity, because there's an extra person, and he's not a priest like Gabriel, so it wouldn't be easy. Now, the next Reaper, more specifically, we are down to the last few Reapers besides Pope himself. One of the last Reapers, one of the ones who was with Leah and everything near the end of the Reaper saga, gets taken out by Rosita. And the second to last Reaper, Washington, gets taken out by Michonne. And even though Michonne's a pro with the blade, we can think that this would be a bit difficult, because Michonne's not really a combat expert as much as she is a sword expert. But anyways, the fight is done. And then we get to Rick versus Pope. Now, like the majority, if not all the stories that I really cover the Reapers in, I'm pretty sure that Pope would try to appeal to the whole believing in God thing and that this is God's plan and all that crap. But for anyone who knows Rick, especially when he talked to Herschel in Season 2, he doesn't believe in God or any of that bullcrap. So, with little fanfare, kills Pope and ends the Reaper saga once and for all. Now, for death-wise, besides Tara and maybe Maze being, like, the main two big deaths, besides that and Regina, we really didn't get too much, like, big deaths here, so the fight and everything was pretty tame. Sort of like my other remake, because I don't even think I had anyone big die in my other remake, so pretty tame overall, ending the Reaper saga. Now, for the Commonwealth. We cut to the scene for the Commonwealth arriving in Alexandria. And I know a bunch of people might be kind of not really liking this, but like the majority of my other stories, I don't see the Commonwealth amounting to much. I really don't. And why is that? Well, it all really has to do with one specific thing. Rick. And the fact that he is around. Any one of the big leaders, Rick, Michonne, any one of those two, or Lori, or something like that, Lance's plans would instantly be figured out, which means that Pamela would in turn get locked away much sooner, making Season 11 just kind of short and almost pointless. So, with Rick around, that really changes the dynamic of how the Commonwealth would go. And that's why in the majority of my other stories, the Commonwealth has been lackluster. Does that mean that it won't be touched upon in future what-ifs? Of course it won't. Of course I will touch upon it, and I'll get more to that in a second. Now, what happens after? Well, we can see Negan and Sasha actually getting a Dead City Negan and Maggie dynamic, except the context for it would be so much different. I am talking so much different because Negan did not kill Glenn. And in turn to that, which means that Glenn Jr. and not Herschel, because Sasha actually had a kid with Glenn, would have a much different relationship with Negan and wouldn't hate him, because, again, he did not kill Glenn. So, if we did get a Dead City thing, it would be with Negan and Sasha and a different sort of Herschel Glenn Jr., and it would just be so much different. And to think, all of this could have happened if Negan had chose to kill Maggie and her baby instead of Glenn, like the original story. And my friends, with kind of a shorter story, haven't done that really since What If Laurie Survived, that ends this remake of What If Negan Killed Maggie. Now, I truly hope you guys enjoyed this remake possibly as much as my other one, or maybe the same. But I hope that you guys enjoyed regardless. Now, on to my whole Commonwealth thing. My next story is going to be what if Sophia joined Negan? And that is going to be I am talking a very long story. Possibly one of my longest to date. And I said that about What If Rick Spared Shane. That remake was frickin' 24 parts. So we could be looking for an even longer one with this story. And that will have the Commonwealth mattering much more. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.